Fiacre, can you see me now? Okay.
I can indeed. How are you?
Great. Sorry for that trouble. No, we'll jump in just now.
Okay.
So good morning, everyone. Once again, I'm so sorry for those issues. My name is Christina McGreevy. I'm head of business support services here at Kenor. Kenor is an award-winning accounting and business services practice. Today, the firm ranks among the top 20 accounting practices in Ireland in terms of size. Our mission is to provide superb financial advice and services to ambitious SMEs, high potential startups, and larger businesses wherever they are. We have a multidisciplinary team of over 90 professionals with specialisms in areas including taxation, corporate compliance, management reporting, bookkeeping, payroll, IT, marketing, and company secretarial. I'm joined this morning by Fiacre Murphy from Autofulfill. Thank you for joining us this morning, Fiacre. Fiacre works closely with the growing online retailers to help them scale through smarter logistics. With hands-on experience in third-party logistics space, he brings deep expertise on when e-commerce businesses should outsource fulfillment, what to expect from a 3PL partner, and how to avoid common pitfalls. And he'll take us through that today. Autofulfill is a fast, reliable, and flexible e-commerce fulfillment partner that helps brands grow without the stress. They work with many well-known brands supporting WooCommerce, Shopify, and TikTok Shop. They also have great experience in helping clients navigate the complexities of Brexit and handling customs. It's important to note that today's webinar is for general information purposes only. For specific advice, we always ask that you get advice from an expert. That being said, Fiacre is open to taking questions today, so use the chat and Q&A feature, and I'll be happy to post questions on behalf.
Amazing.
I'll
Thanks so
hand
much
over
for
to
the
you,
introduction,
Fiacre.
Christina.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Looking forward to hearing all of your insights now.
Yeah, sure. So obviously I come to e-commerce through the lens of fulfillment. So, subjects like warehousing, carrier relationships, pick and pack relationships, and in the broader sense, I suppose the kinds of conversations founders usually have when the infrastructure they've put in place around fulfillment maybe needs some attention. At Autofulfill, as Christina mentioned, we work with a really wide range of different brands across all growth stages, lots of different sectors. And when you speak to enough founders from these kinds of different backgrounds, you start to see the same costs appearing in unexpected places. The kinds of surprises on invoices that show up that maybe weren't explained well before the contract was signed. And that's a large part of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to go through, some of the hidden costs that a lot of people find with outsourced fulfillment. I'll talk about some strategies our clients have taken to tackling the question of free shipping, returns, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of the pros and cons generally of keeping fulfillment in house and working with a 3PL. So to jump straight into it, I'm going to start by speaking with outsourced fulfillment, since that's my strongest area of expertise. A lot of the hidden fees associated with this, I just want to be upfront. Most of them aren't actually hidden or secret, or they're not necessarily buried in fine print. The reasons that these tend to take founders by surprise are usually either they've been very poorly explained during the negotiation stage, they can be very difficult to predict, or a big one is where the client's needs have some kind of inherent complexity for the 3PL that, again, I suppose you could also say that that's not properly explained as well. So the list of them is not by any means limited to that, and I will cover that, but I'm going to explain some of the more common areas that I see and some kind of practical advice that you can take home to kind of prevent yourself from running into any of these issues. So anyone who has gone through the process of, getting a sales proposal from a 3PL, you typically end up with a really long list of itemized charges with a neat little cost per order estimate somewhere on the document. The first mistake that people make is really not looking past that cost estimate at the bottom. Reason being is that very often, not always, but very often that will just cover the actual services needed to pick and pack an order. So pick and pack, shipping box, shipping rate. What it will very often leave out are some of the other things like goods receiving and storage, and these are areas where a lot of hidden costs live. So, speaking to goods receiving first, one of the reasons that this can be a problematic area is that fees in this particular part, they can be quite difficult to predict. Different 3PLs have different ways of charging for it, but the key thing that really drives costs beyond what a sales proposal might set your expectations at is complexity. And that is a key principle about working with a 3PL in any respect is complexity costs money. So what do I mean by that? Let's say your deliveries are scheduled ahead of time, really well packed, so one SKU per carton. Everything's barcoded. You send it with a really detailed shipping plan. That is a very simple process for a 3PL. There's very little complexity in that, and so you should expect to see that reflected in the rates you pay. If, however, that doesn't describe you, maybe your delivery scheduling is all over the place, you've got mixed SKUs and cartons, or worse still, loose items. Maybe your items aren't barcoded, there's no labeling, and there's no kind of shipping plan or anything like that. That is going to take a lot longer for a 3PL to process that, and that's where you'll see costs that maybe you weren't expecting start to appear on your invoice. The key to avoiding surprises here, as with a lot of things, is really clearly communicating with your 3PL. So my best advice would be, ahead of sending out that first delivery, just give them a really good list of all of your SKUs, the quantities of units per SKU, weights and dimensions if you have them, and plus let them know if there's any kind of special handling you need. Maybe if you're working with best before dates or you've got multiple lots per SKU. If you can do that, then there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to give you an accurate estimate of what receiving will actually cost. And if you like what you see, you can always ask them to cap the rates at that accordingly. Storage is the next area I mentioned. Again, another area where it can be really tricky to predict the prices. And there's a good bit of variety in how I've seen different 3PLs charge for this. On the simple side, you'll see a simple kind of per cubic meter pricing model. Whereas the more complex side, you'll see some 3PLs will kind of divide that space into smaller areas. So you'll see things like per picking bin or picking location, same thing. Per overflow pallet, per pallet. They might even go down to the pallet size, whether it's a UK size pallet or an EU size pallet. Obviously, the per cubic meter one, in theory, is much easier to predict because in reality, what happens is a 3PL will treat one pallet as 1 cubic meter, usually. The issue with this model is that I've seen plenty of examples in the past where it seems to shed some accountability from the 3PL. So you'll see examples where a brand is paying a full cubic meter rate for an entire month, where in reality, that's a pallet with a handful of items left on it. Now, that kind of issue is solved by the more complex model, since it kind of splits your storage into much smaller areas. But then the flip side of that is that it's much harder to predict. And to compound this further, there's also the question of how your 3PL actually calculates your storage usage over a full month. In the worst case scenarios, I've seen 3PLs will just take a snapshot of what your storage use is on one day and base your fees on that. Now, if you're a high volume brand, you could have 6, 7, 8 pallets worth of stock move in the interim, but you're still going to end up paying for those for a full month. Now, usually when that comes up, it's kind of a limit on the warehouse's own technology. Like you'll see more kind of technologically mature 3PLs will have the ability to track your footprint on a daily basis. So it's always just worth asking any 3PL, which of those approaches they can accommodate. And similar to the goods receiving example, this is another area where that same info, I suggested you send your 3PL ahead of time to get an estimate on goods receiving cost. That exact same info can give you an accurate estimate on your storage costs. And again, if you like what you see, you can always ask them to cap it at that. Staying on outsourced fulfillment, the one area that's less talked about is inventory accuracy, but this one is really significant because it is an actual hidden cost. And it's an area where we've seen a lot of 3PLs are costing clients a lot more than what shows up on their invoices. So what I mean by that is, most founders will think of inventory accuracy as simply not losing stock, and that's part of it, but it's one of the less important parts, because inventory accuracy, it can have a massive impact on your customer retention and a few other areas. Like if you're working with TikTok Shop, it can affect your kind of your visibility on the platform. So common example would be like, let's say your website is showing stock that you're physically actually out of. Customer tries to buy it. Obviously, you disappoint that customer. You may have to delay, split, or even cancel an order. But you're also potentially going to lose, the entire lifetime value of that customer. The way to think about this is every missing unit is the loss of a potential sale and potentially a customer's lifetime value. What usually happens is someone will ask their 3PL to do a stock take, or else it'll already be scheduled as part of what they do. And you kind of, you might get a nice report with a headline figure of 99% accuracy, which sounds really assuring. But the question is, that's 99% of what, and measured on which day? Like on the first part, if that 1% of missing stock happens to be your highest value SKU, then you already know that the financial impact is far greater than the percentage suggests. Also, an annual stock take it's not a picture of what your accuracy looks like across a full year. It's a snapshot of one day. The other question then is, how does your 3PL land on that 99% accuracy rate that's calculated? Most 3PLs, when it comes to inventory accuracy, they report in net accuracy. Now, net accuracy, I'm not a big fan of it. We're not a fan of it in Autofulfill either, because it offsets stock overages against stock deficits. So it's really not giving you a clear picture of what your actual inventory accuracy is looking like. You could be over by 5 or 6 units on a host of low value SKUs, but then down 10 units on the most expensive SKU or your flagship product. So it's always worth asking, for reporting from your 3PL to be given to you in gross accuracy. That's where you get a complete picture of what every individual SKU looks like. And really what you want to see is proactive cycle counting over a full year. You want your 3PL identifying discrepancies before they turn into customer problems. At Autofulfill, like, we've carried out a number of different operational audits for different founders. And one issue that shows up more often than we were expecting is a certain behavior where you'll notice throughout the year, very few stock adjustments are made, but then a stock take is scheduled either by the client or by the 3PL, and you'll see a cluster of adjustments immediately before and after that. Now, that is worth asking about. It's not necessarily an indication that anything improper is happening, but if you're seeing that the majority of adjustments are only happening when a stock take has been called, it might suggest that there's been issues there for months that no one was acting on. So in summary, for the fulfillment side, with all this in mind, like, working with a 3PL is still an excellent way of enabling growth for your brand. It has its pros and cons, just like building an in-house infrastructure. So with a 3PL, the main pros, I think, would be, your cost scale with your volume in both directions. So whereas, you're going to pay more if you have a really good month in terms of order volume, you're also, it's going to scale down as well. So if you have a quiet month, you're not necessarily going to be punished for that. Naturally, unless you're a huge brand doing a really enormous volume, you're going to have access to better carrier rates than you'll probably be able to negotiate with couriers yourself. It's obviously an excellent way to kind of buy back your time and your team's time and keep your business lean. And it makes it much easier to handle things like growth spikes, seasonal peaks, things like that. The cons of working with a 3PL are, you are paying for flexibility, so you're going to have a slightly higher cost per order. Obviously, there's less kind of immediacy and slightly less control. Like if you have last minute changes, most 3PLs, ourselves included, will be quite flexible and try to be respond as quickly as possible, but it can never be the same as if it's your own setup. But then onto in-house then. So the pros of keeping an in-house setup is obviously you keep much more control over every part of your operation. Your If your volumes are strong and consistent, you do, generally speaking, have a lower cost per order. There's a much higher upside as you scale because your fixed costs don't grow at the same rate as your order volume. They're not as quite as closely linked as they would be if you're working with a 3PL. The cons, of course, is as you grow, it requires a significant kind of capital investment in space. Maybe you need a warehouse or something smaller. You'll also probably need staff, so you'll be owning kind of recruitment, training, also all the overheads, insurance, technology, everything else. The other thing is that it can be slightly riskier because if you do have a quiet month, then your fixed costs aren't going to scale when your volumes do. So quiet months can really hurt from a financial perspective. And then there's a phenomenon called software creep. So, what that looks like is, let's say you start your business, it's just Shopify, things start to scale. So you need an inventory management system, then maybe you need some return software, then it keeps growing. You need an order management system. So whereas where you started off, technology was probably a tiny part of your overall spend. As you scale, that gets much, much bigger. There's also another phenomenon called layout debt, where you have your fulfillment space, you've set it up a certain way, you start to scale, all of a sudden you're handling wholesale as well as direct to consumer. Your layout is causing mistakes, you've got new staff who are learning on the job. It takes time to kind of re-engineer everything and train people up. And then, of course, the other thing is that you're running two businesses similar at the same time, simultaneously, rather. So you've got the e-commerce side, but you've also got an operational side that you now own. So your business you've got a much higher headcount, it's a lot more complex, and you've probably got less time to focus on the e-commerce side of things. Really, when it comes to measuring which approach is for you, it's not a question of cheap versus expensive. It's really about how predictable your volumes are and where you want to focus your attention, really. So the gambit with a 3PL is that you're willing to pay a slightly higher cost per order in exchange for flexibility and the ability to keep your business lean. With in-house fulfillment, you're kind of making the bet that your volumes are going to justify setting up all of this around it, to get that higher upside.
Yeah, there's one element to that, Fiacre, that as you say, if you keep it in-house, and it's important for any business that's considering outsourcing, to look at it in detail and do their sort of 3-year plan, their 5-year plan, because you can make a decision now that, okay, I want to keep it in-house, I want to keep control, I want to have all of those elements. Very quickly, it could hold you back from being able to scale at the pace that the business could grow at, right?
Yeah.
How quickly can a brand turn on third party fulfillment then?
Thankfully, it can be really quick. So,
Okay.
like for instance, at Autofulfill, we've been able to get people on board and fulfilling their orders within a space of 2 days. Um, it really just it's all about communication, if and obviously picking your time of year. There's a difference between onboarding with a fulfillment center during peak when it's too late, and during maybe spring summer when it tends to be a little bit quieter.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it can move extremely quickly. Obviously, it depends on the 3PL, but usually the limiting factor is really just how quickly you can get your stock over to them.
Okay. Yeah. And how organized you are in terms of all of that stock, all of your SKUs, all of
Exactly.
those. So you have to have all of that process very clean. But then ultimately you can turn it on very quickly. Okay, well, I mean, then that's definitely meaning that there's flexibility there for those people that been in house for a certain period of time until they are at that level.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of the conversations I have are at people who've reached that crossroads with their fulfillment setup where it's just like,
Right.
do I invest in a bigger space, hire more people, or do I just outsource this?
Definitely.
Um, again, the right solution is going to be different for every brand.
But there's a reason why the leading brands are doing it, it's because it means that they can scale on the product development side or, marketing side or whatever it may be, for a brand, rather than investing in, as you said, the operations side of the business when that can
Mm.
so easily be outsourced, right?
Yeah,
One
exactly.
question that springs to mind is, like, what do you have, like, a minimum recurring monthly volume that a brand would need to have in order to work with you or
Yeah,
any other
so
third party provider?
kind of, yeah. So anyone who's spoken to a fulfillment center knows that fulfillment centers rates reward high volume.
Mhm.
There is kind of a point under which a lot of customers won't usually get a lot of value from working with a 3PL. It
Okay.
differs depending on which one you speak with, because larger 3PLs are going to be much more punishing for lower volume brands than a smaller one. For us, I would usually recommend that someone's average order volume works out at around 200 orders per month before they really start seriously entertaining working with a 3PL. Anything
That's a good
below that,
benchmark.
and like your picking rates are going to be a lot higher. Depending on the partner you choose, you're going to be lower in their priority list. So it's yeah, there's definitely a point where it's too early to go to a 3PL.
Okay, well that's good to know. Hopefully that's helpful for our attendees as well. Um, then it would be really helpful to understand how you manage then that returns process. And I know for any e-commerce brand, that must be a huge concern for them in terms of, like, the impact that can have on profitability of their business, that return
Mm.
rate, and how that's handled, and any insights that you have to share.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to returns, you're looking at two or three components, depending on whether you're in house, depending on whether you're outsourcing fulfillment or whether you've kept it in house. The first, the most obvious one is obviously the cost of shipping, usually somewhere between €4 and €6. Some brands will absorb the cost of this, others will pass it on to the customer. What we hear from our clients who have opted to absorb that cost is it does really improve customer retention, means that customer is much more likely to come back to you. But on the flip side, a lot of brands have also said that it increases their returns rate.
Yeah.
So it's something to measure in. I can talk a little bit more later about how some of the brands we work with kind of deal with this. But to go back to my point anyway, the second component, and really this only applies if you're outsourcing fulfillment, is next, it's the cost that the fulfillment center charges for handling that return. So I've seen a lot of different rate cards from different 3PLs. Usually the rate for returns kind of varies between €1 and €4 per order.
Okay.
What that fee covers is a really important conversation to have. It's something that a lot of brands don't get enough visibility on before they sign. At the lower end, if you see, about €1 per return, chances are, it's not a guarantee, but chances are that fee is just going to cover taking failed deliveries or items that have never been removed from their packaging and putting them back into inventory. If you need something extra, if you need like an inspection or anything else, then it's going to add on sub fees. At the higher end, where brands are charging like €3 or €4 per order, usually that implies that those services are part of their process. So if you don't need those, you need to talk to your fulfillment center about a lower rate. Like, on the simple side, a lot of supplements brands are. It's just a case where if that item has been opened, it can't be put back into inventory. It's a very cheap. They get very cheap return rates because it's not a complex process. Whereas some of the brands we work with who be in the kind of luxury clothing space, they'll need that item to be inspected, graded, refolded, potentially steamed, and that's a much more active process, hence the higher cost. So
Okay.
it's always worth knowing exactly what the return fee a 3PL quotes you actually covers and see if it matches what you need.
Yeah.
The third component then, and this is important for kind of looking at your own contribution margin per order, is the outcome of the return itself. So once an item comes back, generally speaking, one of three things is going to happen. It's either going to get returned into your stock, it will get pooled or stored aside until the brand gives instruction on what they want done with it, or it ends up getting destroyed, which can incur a disposal fee or like a full product write-off from your perspective. Most brands will know what their return rate is, but very few know what their return outcome split is. So, i.e., what percentage of your returns end up back in stock. Like that split has a direct impact on your true cost per return. So it's always worth knowing.
That's really
Um,
helpful insight there, Fiona, for all of our attendees, because you're really breaking down like all of those hidden costs that people couldn't, that may not have asked the right questions or, known to ask the right questions. And in particular, how to break down the pros and cons and those other ideas of, I really liked your point on like scaling an operation when it comes to doing your shipment in-house and how sustainable that is for long term. Um, and whether or not, no one starts a brand, I think, or an e-commerce shop to be busy packaging orders. That's probably the part that's least enjoyable for any brand.
yeah.
I'm sure that there's people that can get a bit of joy from it, but mainly, you start it for the development of that product, right? And so that's where they have the love for it. And so I always think that 3PL is just such a fantastic option for any business, similar to when we're talking to businesses and they're considering outsourcing their finance function. Any business gets to that point where they can only do so much themselves, and then it's a choice of, well, I either need to hire more staff or I can look to outsource this. And just as you said, it keeps things lean and keeps you focusing on your core business and what's actually bringing you joy, making you money, all of those elements. But the hidden costs that you've considered and broken down for everyone today, I think has been really helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's I'm a big fan of the early stage brand, the founders fulfilling everything themselves, and it's a really valuable time because they generally learn a lot. They get to stay really close to the customer. The key is just knowing when that setup is actually becoming a blocker to your growth, and just having a plan in mind, be it building infrastructure around fulfillment or whether it's working with a partner.
Yeah.
I've been speaking with some people who are at their early stages now for over a year, where they just want to know, they just want to identify, who their partner is going to be when they reach that stage. And it's a good way of doing it. It's like it's a really important relationship for any e-commerce business. If you're outsourcing, you're trusting a third party with a really crucial part of your business. So it's important to build that trust. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's been really helpful. We haven't received any other questions through. So, was there anything else, Fiacre, that you wanted to cover today?
I know I've probably talked a little bit longer than we expected me to. I can
Okay.
talk a little bit about the free shipping issue and how some brands handle that, or if anyone would like more detail on any of this, I'm happy to speak to anyone about any of this, be it a sales conversation or not. So yeah, I can talk about it now, or I can leave myself open to anyone to get in touch with me privately.
Yeah, we ran just slightly over time now,
Yeah,
because we were a few minutes late starting. So we'll leave it at that if that's
perfect.
okay. And then any of our attendees, if you'd like to reach out to Fiacre, his details are on the webinar page, and we'll circulate his email address in our follow-up email where the recording will be sent. Thank you so much for your time, Fiacre. It's been really helpful for us to get an insight into what to look out for and certainly how to break down the pros and cons of outsourcing your fulfillment. Um, and thanks for your time. I hope everyone has a great day today. And talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or if you want to talk to me about fulfillment. I'm always happy to talk shop. So thanks again.
Thanks, Fiacre. Farewell, good slide.
So